What if I told you that the strictest professor at Hogwarts, the one who never showed weakness, once had her heart broken twice? That Minerva McGonagall, before becoming the legendary headmistress, was a young woman who had to choose between the love of her life and the magical world? This is a story of sacrifice, courage, and a love so deep that she had to bury it forever. Prepare yourself, because what you're about to discover today will completely change how you see Professor McGonagall. But before we begin this exciting journey through Minerva's secret life, help me out here. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any magical videos. And comment below which city you're watching this video from. I'm very curious to know where our audience passionate about the magical universe comes from. Now let's dive into this incredible story. Long before becoming the imposing headmistress of Hogwarts, Minerva McGonagall was just a young Scottish woman born between two worlds that could never meet. Her mother, Isabel Ross, was a talented witch who graduated from Hogwarts. Her father, Robert McGonagall, was a Muggle Presbyterian minister who believed only in what his eyes could see. Just imagine the scene: a house in the Scottish Highlands, the cold wind howling outside, and inside, a 6-year-old girl desperately trying to hide that she had just made her toy levitate. Minerva grew up learning that magic, although part of her blood needed to be hidden, as if it were a terrible guilt. Each spark of magical power that escaped from her fingers brought that look of fear and disappointment in her father's eyes. Robert McGonagall never knew that his wife was a witch. Isabel had hidden the truth from him for years, and that lie weighed on the house like a dark and suffocating cloud. Silence reigned over any manifestation of magic. It was in this divided environment, in this childhood marked by fear and secrets, that Minerva shaped her personality. The iron discipline, the unquestionable righteousness, and especially that devastating capacity to love in complete silence. When the day finally came to go to Hogwarts, Minerva felt for the first time in her life that she could breathe. There, in that magical castle, she didn't need to hide. The sorting hat barely touched her head and already shouted, "Gryffindor!" The house of the brave, the determined, those who face fear head-on. And Minerva was all that and much more. Her intelligence shone especially in transfiguration classes, where she showed an almost intuitive understanding of the laws governing magical transformation. It was as if she had been born for it. The young Professor Albus Dumbledore, still charismatic and full of energy at that time, soon noticed the special brilliance of that quiet student. He saw in her a rare potential, a flame that few wizards possessed. Minerva became a prefect, then head girl, and finished her studies with the highest honors that Hogwarts could offer. Everyone believed she was destined for a brilliant career in the magical world. Ministry of Magic, advanced research in transfiguration, perhaps even becoming the next great authority in magic. The sky was the limit, but fate had other plans. After graduation, Minerva returned to her village in the Highlands, carrying with her a deep desire to find inner peace. And it was there, among mist-covered mountains and green fields, that she reunited with Dougal McGregor. He was a young Muggle farmer, son of the land, known throughout the village for his kindness and integrity. Dougal knew absolutely nothing about spells, potions, or magic wands, but he understood the human soul with a depth that few wizards could achieve. The love between Minerva and Dougal was born in the simplest and purest way that exists. Long walks among sheep and mountains, laughter muffled by the highland wind, hands intertwined as they watched the sunset paint the sky red and gold. With Dougal, Minerva experienced something she hadn't felt for a long time: freedom. For the first time in her life, she didn't need to be the best student, the perfect head girl, or the exemplary witch. She could be just Minerva, just a young Scottish woman in love. Then that day came, an autumn afternoon, with leaves falling softly around them. Dougal knelt before Minerva. There was no expensive jeweller's ring, no ostentation, just a small silver ring that he himself had forged with his own hands. The gesture was so genuine, so full of true love, that Minerva couldn't hold back her tears. For the first time she believed she could unite the two worlds within herself, the world of magic and the world of mortals. She could have a normal life, true love, maybe even a family. She accepted the proposal without hesitation. For days, Minerva lived in absolute ecstasy. She planned the future, imagined the simple ceremony in the village, thought about what it would be like to wake up every day next to the man she loved. But then, like a shadow that never really disappears, memories of her mother returned with full force. Isabel Ross had made the same choice years ago. She married a Muggle for love, hid her true nature for decades, lived a life divided between what she was and what she needed to pretend to be. And Minerva had grown up witnessing the crushing weight of that impossible love. The night after the marriage proposal, Minerva couldn't sleep. She walked alone through the empty fields, with only the full moon as company, illuminating her path and reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. It was there, in that moment of absolute solitude, that she understood the terrible truth. If she went ahead with the marriage, she would end up repeating exactly the same tragedy as her parents. She would have to hide who she really was for the rest of her life. She would have to lie about every aspect of her existence, and one day, when the truth inevitably came to light, it would destroy not only her heart, but also Dougal's. The next morning, when the sun had barely begun to rise over the mountains, Minerva went to Dougal's farm. Her heart beat so hard it seemed to want to leap from her chest. With a trembling voice, each word costing a piece of her soul, she confessed that she couldn't marry him. Dougal tried to understand, asked questions, begged for explanations, but Minerva couldn't tell the truth. How could she explain that she was a witch, that she belonged to a world he didn't even know existed, that their love, however true it was, had been doomed from the start? Minerva walked away before he could ask more questions, carrying in her chest a void as large as the love she had just buried. When she got home, she allowed herself to cry for the first time since childhood. She cried silently, because even in pain she maintained that iron composure. She cried because she knew she had chosen the right path, the path that would spare Dougal from a life of lies and disappointments. But that didn't make the pain any less. Quite the contrary. From that day on, love and duty became her two ghosts, haunting every step she took. Trying to escape that pain that threatened to consume her, Minerva moved to London and joined the Ministry of Magic. She began working in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, where her sharp intelligence and unwavering ethics soon drew attention. But no matter how much she dedicated herself to work, no matter how many piles of parchment she analyzed, no matter how many endless meetings she attended, her soul remained distant, as if an essential part of her had been left behind in those highland fields. It was during this dark period that she met Elphinstone Urquhart, a kind and scholarly wizard who worked as her direct superior. Elphinstone was completely different from Dougal. While Dougal represented the simplicity of rural life and spontaneous love, Elphinstone was cultured, patient, with that discreet charm of academics. He saw in Minerva not just a brilliant colleague, but a woman of rare strength, someone who had survived storms he couldn't even imagine. After a few months working together, Elphinstone gathered courage and invited her to dinner. The gesture caught Minerva completely by surprise. She politely declined, but something in that gentle approach touched her wounded heart. Elphinstone didn't insist invasively. He simply continued being attentive, respectful, showing his affection discreetly over the years. Minerva admired him deeply, recognized his qualities, but still wasn't able to open her heart. There was something in the past, a still very recent wound, that time hadn't yet been able to heal. After 2 years immersed in that bureaucratic routine at the ministry, Minerva realized that wasn't her true place. The parchments, the laws, the internal politics, all of it seemed empty compared to what she really loved. Teaching, transforming, seeing the sparkle in young wizards' eyes when they finally mastered a difficult spell. It was exactly at this moment of doubt that a letter arrived, bearing the unmistakable seal of Hogwarts. It was from Albus Dumbledore, her former professor and mentor. The invitation was simple but powerful. Return to Hogwarts as Transfiguration Professor. Reading those words written in Dumbledore's characteristic handwriting, Minerva felt a familiar warmth course through her chest for the first time in years. It was as if the castle was literally calling her back home, and she knew, deep in her soul, that it was exactly where she belonged. Upon returning to Hogwarts, Minerva found the castle as alive and magical as she remembered. The tinkling of goblets in the great hall during meals, the soft glow of floating candles illuminating the corridors, the echo of young voices filling every corner with life and energy. Dumbledore received her with that warm smile she knew so well, his blue eyes shining with wisdom and genuine affection. "Minerva," he said in that calm voice, "Hogwarts has always belonged to you." And in that instant she felt that, despite all the terrible losses she had experienced, fate still held a greater purpose for her. Romantic love, the kind that Dougal represented, might have been left behind, but duty, hope, and the possibility of making a difference in the lives of hundreds of young wizards would remain, and in a way it would be a different kind of love. A love that would manifest itself through teaching, protection, and absolute dedication to that castle, and all who lived within its ancestral walls. Minerva quickly became an exemplary teacher, known throughout Hogwarts. Her students feared and adored her. She was demanding, never accepted less than the best effort from each student, but everyone knew that behind that rigidity was genuine care. Under her rigorous but fair guidance, entire generations of wizards learned that discipline is also a deep form of affection. That setting limits and demanding excellence wasn't cruelty, but rather the greatest demonstration that someone believes in your potential. In the lonely hours of the night, when the castle finally fell silent and the students slept in their dormitories, Minerva would take refuge in the highest tower, watching the dense mist form over the Black Lake. Sometimes on especially cold nights, when the north wind blew strong and the stars shone with uncommon intensity, the memory of Dougal would return like a gentle ghost. The sound of that spontaneous laughter, the comforting warmth of his work-roughened hands, the simple way he saw the world. But instead of just sadness, there was now a different kind of serenity. The acceptance that some choices, however painful they may be, are necessary so that we can fulfill our true destiny. The years passed at Hogwarts, and Minerva established herself completely in that routine of teaching and dedication. But the past, as always happens, has a peculiar way of returning when we least expect it. Elphinstone Urquhart, that kind and scholarly wizard who had worked with her at the ministry years ago, had never forgotten her. Even after all that time, even without working together anymore, he kept in his heart the memory of that extraordinary woman who had fascinated him from the first moment. And then, on a spring afternoon when flowers were beginning to bloom in the gardens of Hogwarts, Elphinstone came looking for her again. Once more, with the same patience and respect as years before, he asked for her hand in marriage. But this time, something was different. Minerva had matured through pain, learned to live with her losses, found a balance between what the heart desired and what life allowed. And this time, with a soft smile on her lips and tears in her eyes, she said yes. Not because she had forgotten Dougal. That kind of love never really disappears. It just finds a quiet place in the heart where it can rest without causing constant pain. But because Minerva had learned a fundamental lesson of life, the human heart, even after being broken and mended, can still find new ways to love. It wasn't the same kind of overwhelming and impossible love she had felt for Dougal. It was something more mature, more conscious, built on foundations of mutual respect, admiration, and genuine understanding. The wedding was discreet, an intimate ceremony celebrated in Hogsmeade, that magical village full of charm and history. Dumbledore naturally was the best man, his proud smile illuminating the small hall where the ceremony took place. It was a moment of genuine peace, a new beginning that Minerva never imagined would be possible after everything she had lived through. The couple established residence in a small, cozy house near the village, a place where they could have privacy but still be close to Hogwarts. Elphinstone was an attentive and loyal husband, always respecting the moments when Minerva needed silence, always present when she needed company. And Minerva, although maintaining her reserved nature and strong personality, loved him sincerely and deeply. Sometimes on cold winter afternoons, while having tea by the fireplace with the fire crackling softly, Elphinstone would tell old stories from the Ministry of Magic. Tales of curious cases, eccentric wizards, absurd situations that could only happen in the magical world. And he would laugh with that humor that only mature wizards possess. A laugh that comes from the experience of having lived long enough to understand that life is both tragic and comic. They were peaceful years, a precious period of peace between the storms that had marked Minerva's past and those still to come. For the first time since she had left Dougal in those highland fields, Minerva believed that the past finally rested in peace, that she could have this simple life beside a good man, dividing her afternoons between Hogwarts and that cozy little house, aging with dignity and perhaps even finding something like complete happiness. But life, as Minerva so often taught her students in transfiguration classes, is made of inevitable transformations. Changes we cannot control, no matter how powerful we are or how many spells we know. And sometimes these transformations are cruel and unjust in a way that no logic can explain. On an apparently ordinary day, while Elphinstone was walking through the village taking care of some routine tasks, he was attacked by a venomous tentacula. This type of magical creature, extremely dangerous when provoked, bit him severely. Despite all the desperate efforts of the healers at St. Mungo's, despite all the most advanced potions and spells that magical medicine could offer, he didn't survive the injuries. Minerva McGonagall became a widow, and although she bore this new loss with all the dignity and composure that characterized her, although she didn't shed tears in public or show weakness before anyone, those who knew her deeply knew the truth. A part of her had broken again. It was as if fate had decided to remind her, in the cruelest way possible, that love in her life would always come accompanied by loss, that she was destined to bury everyone she dared to love. After Elphinstone's death, Minerva made a definitive decision. She returned to live at Hogwarts, this time permanently. There would be no more little house in the village, no more tea afternoons and stories by the fireplace. The castle became her home in every sense, and her students, her true family. She threw herself into work with even greater dedication, channeling all that unprocessed pain into absolute dedication to teaching and protecting the school. It was during this period that Dumbledore needed her most. There were whispered conversations about the return of dark forces, about wizards who were beginning to follow dangerous ideas about blood purity and magical supremacy. Minerva discreetly participated in the first meetings about resistance, helping to form what would eventually become the first line of defense against the darkness that was approaching. The void left by Elphinstone's loss gradually transformed into something different, into courage, into determination, into a silent but unshakable strength that Minerva would dedicate completely to the school and the young wizards who needed protection in an increasingly dangerous world. If she couldn't have romantic love, if fate had decided she would walk alone in this life, then she would make this solitude a protective shield for all those she loved in different ways. During the following decades, Minerva was a silent witness to the greatest events that shook the magical world. She fought bravely in the First Wizarding War, facing Death Eaters with the same determination with which she taught transfiguration. She mentored young talents like James Potter, seeing in him that same flame of courage she recognized in herself. She met Lily Evans, admiring the brilliant intelligence and kind heart of that young Muggle-born witch. She witnessed the arrival of Severus Snape, that dark and complex boy who carried more pain than any child should bear. She witnessed the turbulent friendship between Sirius Black and the other Marauders, each with their unique flame, each destined for a painful path. Love for Minerva never again took the form of romance. That door had definitively closed, locked with spells that not even she, a master of transfiguration, could undo. But love manifested itself in other equally powerful ways. As an absolute devotion to Hogwarts, that castle that had been her refuge when the world outside became unbearable. As fierce protection of students, each one important, each life under her responsibility worth more than her own. As unwavering loyalty to the principles that Dumbledore defended, even when it meant facing unimaginable dangers. Dumbledore and Minerva developed over the years a deep friendship, marked by mutual respect and a silent but intense affection. He saw her as his equal, recognized in her a strength that complemented his own wisdom. She saw him as a beacon that illuminated the darkest paths of the school, someone who even in the most difficult moments never lost hope. When he needed to make impossible decisions, choices that would weigh on his conscience, Minerva was by his side, offering honest advice and unwavering support. And when she wavered, when doubt threatened to consume her determination, it was Dumbledore's calm voice that sustained her. There was no romantic passion between them, but something infinitely more rare and precious: absolute trust. The kind of connection that can only be built through decades of shared battles, victories celebrated together and defeats endured side by side. It was a friendship that transcended any simple definition, a bond forged in the furnaces of adversity and tempered by common dedication to something greater than either of them. Even after decades, even after building an entire life away from those Highland fields, Dougal McGregor never completely ceased to exist in Minerva's memory. Sometimes, during summers when students returned home and the castle became silent and empty, she would walk alone through the perfectly maintained gardens of Hogwarts. And as the wind played with her hair, now with silver strands mixed with dark, she would think about what life would have been like if she had made a different choice that fateful morning. She imagined herself growing old beside Dougal, perhaps surrounded by children and grandchildren, living that simple farm life. Without magic, without Hogwarts, without the weight of carrying the future of hundreds of young wizards on her shoulders, just a common life with all the common joys and sorrows that would bring. Then she would always smile to herself, a sad smile, but also full of acceptance. Because, deep in her soul, Minerva knew the truth. Every choice she had made, however painful it had been, had led her there, to that place where she was genuinely needed, where she could make a real difference in the world. When the Second Wizarding War began, and Voldemort returned from the ashes, more powerful and cruel than ever, Minerva became one of the main leaders of the resistance within Hogwarts. Her indomitable spirit, forged through all those losses and sacrifices, inspired students and teachers equally. Even under constant threat, even knowing that each day could be the last, she kept calm and hope burning like torches in the darkness. There was something deeply maternal in her posture during those terrible years. A woman who had lost so much, who had never had her own children, but who now protected each young wizard as if they were hers. Who stayed awake endless nights planning how to keep them safe, how to ensure that the future of magic wouldn't be destroyed by the darkness that threatened to swallow everything. During the Battle of Hogwarts, that apocalyptic night that would decide the fate of the magical world, Minerva fought like a lioness defending her cubs. Her spells were precise and devastating, her leadership unquestionable. She commanded the defense of the castle with a mastery that made clear why she had been chosen for Gryffindor so many years ago. Those who saw her that day, illuminated by the flashes of wands and the fires consuming parts of the castle, swear she seemed guided by something greater than magic itself. Perhaps it was the love she had once lost, now transformed into pure courage. Perhaps it was Dougal's strength, that simple farmer she had loved with all her heart, now living through her. Perhaps it was Elphinstone, that gentle husband that fate had stolen from her too soon, lending her courage from beyond. Or perhaps it was simply Minerva being who she had always been, a woman who, when forced to choose between what was easy and what was right, always chose what was right, no matter the personal cost. When the war finally ended and silence descended on the castle like a heavy cloak, Minerva walked alone through the devastated corridors. Hogwarts was in ruins, its ancient towers marked by dark spells, its walls stained with memories of terrible battles. Dumbledore was no longer among the living, his wise and comforting presence now just a painful memory. Many of her former students had departed, their lives cut short before their time by a war they never asked to fight. It was there, walking alone through the rubble and memories, touching the cold walls that had witnessed so many generations of wizards, that Minerva finally understood the complete truth of her life. Hogwarts was the great love of her existence, everything she had lost over the years, all the painful renunciations she had made, all the sacrifices she had endured in silence, had transformed into something that no spell, not even the darkest and most powerful, could ever erase. Legacy. In the following years, Minerva officially assumed the headmistress position at Hogwarts. Her presence in the main chair of the Great Hall commanded immediate respect and transmitted a sense of security that the school desperately needed. The new students, those who arrived after the war, saw her as an almost mythical figure. Someone who seemed to have lived through all eras of magic, witnessed all great events, survived all impossible challenges. But behind that apparent rigidity, that severe posture she maintained even in the most casual moments, there was a deep tenderness that few could see. Each rare smile she granted to a shy child, each gentle word of encouragement before an important exam, each discreet gesture of protection when a student faced difficulties, were silent reminders of something fundamental. Love, for Minerva McGonagall, had always found new ways to exist. She never married again. That door, as already mentioned, had definitively closed. She lived with almost Spartan simplicity, surrounded by old Transfiguration books, cups of tea that cooled while she graded exams, and the distant sound of towers resonating through open windows. Those who knew her closely knew that sometimes she kept a small wooden box on her desk, a simple box, without extravagant decorations, but treated with almost reverential care. Inside, it rested a silver ring, simple and worn by time. The same ring that Dougal McGregor had given her when he proposed, so many years ago in those Highland fields. Minerva never explained to anyone how she had recovered it. Perhaps he had discreetly left it at her door before moving on with his own life. Perhaps she had secretly kept it before leaving. Perhaps it was just a memory that refused to completely disappear. No one ever knew the truth, and she never offered explanations. Minerva McGonagall's forbidden love wasn't a tragedy in the traditional sense of the word. It was, above all, a conscious choice, the deliberate sacrifice of someone who understood with painful clarity that love in certain lives doesn't manifest itself to be lived in the conventional romantic sense, but to teach fundamental lessons about courage, renunciation, and duty. And over the following decades, This love she had buried with so much pain gradually transformed into the invisible force that kept Hogwarts standing through the storms. That inspired entire generations of wizards to choose courage even in the face of paralyzing pain. That showed everyone, through the silent example of a life lived with unshakable dignity, that the greatest magics aren't those that transform objects or conjure fire, but those that transform people and leave eternal marks on their hearts. With the passing of years, Hogwarts filled completely again, with cheerful voices, spontaneous laughter, and hurried steps through the corridors during class changes. Under the firm but loving direction of Minerva McGonagall, the castle regained that magical harmony that had always symbolized hope for the wizarding world. She personally restored damaged portraits, supervised the reconstruction of destroyed towers, and returned to the school all the dignity and majesty that the wars had tried to steal. At the annual sorting ceremonies, when the sorting hat shouted the names of houses and new students walked nervously to their respective tables, Minerva looked at each child with a silent tenderness that few could perceive. It was as if she saw in each young and hopeful face fragments of all those who came before. James Potter in the impulsive courage of a Gryffindor boy, Lily Evans in the brilliant kindness of a Ravenclaw girl, Severus Snape in the dark complexity of a young Slytherin. With each new school year, Hogwarts literally reborn in the voices and dreams of those children, and with it, the woman who had dedicated her entire life to protecting that constant rebirth. Although her life was marked by rigorous discipline and almost excessive prudence in personal matters, Minerva maintained a discreet sense of humor that surprised those lucky enough to witness it. On cold winter afternoons, when snow covered the grounds of Hogwarts like a white and silent blanket, it was common to see her in the teacher's room, having tea with Pomona Sprout, the herbology professor. The two shared old stories, remembered problematic students who became exemplary citizens, and laughed at those absurd situations that could only happen in a magic school. Sometimes, when a particularly funny joke was told, Minerva would let out a genuine and spontaneous laugh, the kind that revealed a youth still alive in her gaze, despite all the decades and all the losses. In these rare but precious moments, it was possible to see beyond the severe teacher and the relentless headmistress, seeing the woman who still existed under all those layers of protection that life had forced her to build. The newer teachers, those who arrived at Hogwarts after the wars and knew Minerva only as the legendary headmistress, admired her strength without fully understanding the weight she carried. For most of them, McGonagall was simply a figure of maximum authority, someone whose word was absolute law within that castle. But for those few who had known her for decades, who had witnessed her silent battles and countless losses, she was something much deeper. A woman who had learned to transform pain into wisdom, loneliness into strength, and sacrifice into eternal legacy. On the rare occasions when she allowed herself to truly rest, when the responsibilities of headmistress permitted a few moments of peace, Minerva would walk alone through the inner courtyard of Hogwarts. She would watch snow accumulating softly on the ancient stones, each flake falling with a delicacy that seemed impossible in a world so marked by violence and conflict. On these special nights, the profound silence of the castle seemed to literally speak to her, whispering memories of all the generations that had passed through those corridors. In these moments of chosen solitude, she allowed herself to remember Dougal McGregor, without the sharp pain that used to accompany these memories. She thought of him not with paralyzing sadness, but with a deep and sincere gratitude. He represented everything most human and pure in her story, the living memory that, even among ancestral magical laws and impossible to share secrets, a wizard's heart is made of exactly the same fragile and precious matter as the heart of any ordinary person. With the inevitable passing of time, Minerva McGonagall became not just Headmistress of Hogwarts, but a true living symbol of integrity for the entire wizarding world. No absurd ministerial decree, no devastating war, no terrible personal loss had managed to shake her fundamental principles. She believed with a conviction that bordered on religious, that true magic didn't reside in complex spells or powerful potions, but in the choices we make when no one is watching, in the moments when it would be much easier to simply give up. And perhaps it was exactly this unshakable belief that made her so powerful, not in the sense of raw, magical power, but in a much deeper and more lasting sense. She possessed the rare capacity to love without needing to possess, to lead without ever dominating, to teach without expecting applause or public recognition. It was this specific type of spell, silent and constant as the flow of tides, that made Hogwarts a truly indestructible place, even when its physical towers fell and its walls cracked under the weight of battles. On special ceremonial days, when the Sorting Hat echoed its verdicts through halls illuminated by thousands of floating candles, Minerva observed the anxious faces of new students with attention that went far beyond professional. Some visibly trembled with fear, terrified at the possibility of disappointing their families or being sent to the wrong house. Others vibrated with barely contained excitement, barely able to wait to begin their magical adventures. And she remembered, with a crystalline clarity that time had never managed to blur, her own youth. She remembered that feeling in her stomach when the hat touched her head for the first time. That sensation of being judged by something much greater than herself. She remembered the immense relief when she heard that powerful shout, "Gryffindor." And in each curious look she caught among the newcomers, she saw not just individual faces, but the eternal promise of new beginnings. Courage, she used to say silently to herself, is the first magic one learns when crossing the doors of Hogwarts, and the last one forgets when departing. This phrase, never said aloud but lived in every action, would become one of her most remembered legacies by those who knew her well. The considerable fame she built over decades of exemplary service never went to her head in any way. Minerva systematically refused decorations offered by the ministry, avoided public speeches whenever possible, and clearly preferred the silent corridors of Hogwarts to the artificial shine of official events in the Great Hall. She was almost invisible within her own grandeur, moving through the backstage of history while others received applause. Still, students revered her with a unique mixture of respect and genuine affection. Whispered rumors ran among the younger years that a single look from those penetrating eyes was enough to command absolute respect, that she could paralyze a mischievous student with just a raised eyebrow. But they also said that a rare smile from McGonagall, sincere and warm, had the power to calm even the most anxious heart before an impossible exam. Her true authority wasn't born from fear or intimidation, but from something infinitely more powerful, genuine compassion expressed through high expectations. In a world that so often got completely lost in power games, in petty disputes over positions and titles, Minerva McGonagall remained as a constant reminder that true command doesn't come from shouts or threats, but from the silent and consistent example of a life lived with unshakable principles. With the inexorable advance of age, subtle but undeniable changes began to appear. Minerva started walking a little slower through the long corridors of Hogwarts, her steps still firm but measured, conserving energy. Her hair, once predominantly dark, with just a few rebellious silver strands, gained increasingly white streaks, creating a pattern that paradoxically made her seem even more majestic. Her hands, those same hands that had wielded wands in so many battles and graded thousands of exams over decades, became delicate, marked by time and experience. But her eyes, those remained exactly the same. alert as a hawk hunting in the highlands, intense as magical fire, full of wisdom accumulated through decades of joys and tragedies. When Minerva looked at someone, really looked, she seemed to see not just the surface, but the deepest layers of the soul. It was simultaneously comforting and intimidating, that gaze that saw everything and judged with absolute justice. Sometimes, especially on golden summer afternoons when students had already departed and the castle breathed with a slower rhythm, teachers who remained found Minerva at the top of the North Tower. She would stand there motionless, watching the horizon where mountains met sky, her silhouette outlined against the setting sun's light, seeming like a living statue dedicated to the very essence of Hogwarts. No one dared interrupt her in these moments. Everyone instinctively respected that this was more than simple contemplation. It was almost a spiritual communion between the witch and the castle that had been her true home throughout her adult life. No one really knew what Minerva saw when she looked at that distant horizon. Perhaps she saw the past overlapping with the present, all generations of wizards who had passed through those corridors, merging into a single timeless image. Perhaps she saw the faces of those she had loved and lost. Dougal walking among his sheep, Elphinstone smiling over a cup of tea, Dumbledore with that peculiar gleam in his blue eyes. Or perhaps she simply watched time pass, flowing like an invisible river that carries us all in its relentless current, leaving behind only memories and the legacy of our choices. When Minerva turned 80 years old, the Hogwarts teachers organized a modest but deeply meaningful celebration in her honor. The Great Hall was decorated with the traditional Gryffindor colors, red and gold shining under the light of hundreds of floating candles. Even the resident ghosts of Hogwarts, including the Bloody Baron and the Grey Lady, made a point of appearing to pay their respects to the headmistress everyone respected. From high in his gold-framed portrait, Albus Dumbledore observed everything with that characteristic smile of paternal pride, his painted eyes gleaming as if they were truly alive. Minerva thanked everyone with her usual discretion, but those who knew her deeply could perceive the genuine emotion hidden beneath her controlled voice. When she finally stood to make a brief speech, her words were few, but loaded with profound meaning. "It wasn't Hogwarts that survived because of me," she said, with that brutal honesty that had always characterized her. "It was I who survived thanks to Hogwarts. This school gave me purpose when I had nothing, gave me a family when I was completely alone, gave me reasons to continue when it would have been much easier to simply give up." The phrase, said with moving simplicity, drew warm applause and sincere tears from everyone present, and for one magical and unforgettable night, the entire castle seemed to pulse in perfect unison with the heart of that extraordinary woman who had dedicated her entire life to protecting it. After that memorable celebration, Minerva discreetly began to write small accounts of her life. They weren't grandiose memoirs destined for publication or posthumous fame, but rather personal notes on parchments carefully kept in the Transfiguration Tower. She wrote so that future generations of wizards could understand a fundamental truth she had learned through decades of sacrifices. Truly powerful magic always has a price, and the most genuine courage, the kind that really transforms the world, sometimes requires that we renounce what we most desire. In one of these parchments, written on a rainy afternoon when melancholy hung in the air like mist, she recorded a line that would eventually become legendary among the few privileged students who had access to these writings after her death. The phrase said, "Those who consciously give up true love in the name of a greater good do not lose their heart in making that impossible choice. In fact, they transform that heart into an eternal flame that never goes out, illuminating the path for all those who come after." The days naturally became calmer, the nights progressively longer. Minerva spent the rigorous winters reading voraciously by the always lit fireplace in her private quarters, surrounded by her faithful cats and memories that were simultaneously painful and comforting. The painted portrait of Elphinstone Urquhart smiled gently over the bookshelf of old books, and frequently she greeted him in silence, as if he could still hear her through the paint and canvas. Despite the physical solitude that marked her final years, there was a deep peace that had finally established itself in her soul. It wasn't the peace of absence of conflicts or the empty tranquility of a life without meaning. It was something much more precious, the peace that is born when all pains have taught absolutely everything they had to teach, when all wounds have finally healed, leaving only scars that tell stories of survival and courage. Minerva had lived much, loved deeply, lost immensely, but looking back through the mist of years, she could see with crystalline clarity that she had given the world infinitely more than she had ever received. And perhaps that was exactly what we call true legacy, not the amount of accumulated riches or received honors, but the tangible difference we make in the lives of those who come after us. One luminous spring morning, a young first-year student found her in the inner courtyard, standing alone, looking at the infinite blue sky. With the characteristic ingenuousness of children who haven't yet learned to fear asking profound questions, he approached timidly and asked, "Professor McGonagall, why did you never leave Hogwarts? Why did you never leave to live somewhere else?" Minerva smiled, one of those rare but genuine smiles that completely illuminated her normally severe face. She adjusted her glasses with that characteristic gesture and responded with disarming simplicity. "Because Hogwarts never left me, my young friend. This castle became part of who I am, as fundamental as my own magic." The answer echoed in the air like an invisible spell, engraving itself in the boy's memory with a force he would only fully understand many years later when he became an adult and realized that certain places aren't made just of stone and wood, but of the people who never really leave. On the last winter night of which there is precise record, Minerva McGonagall walked alone through the ancestral corridors of Hogwarts in a kind of silent pilgrimage. The ancient torches illuminated her path with flickering and comforting light, and the cold March wind blew through the high windows, bringing with it the distant smell of approaching spring. Each room she passed brought an avalanche of vivid memories. The contagious laughter of students echoing during breaks, intense philosophical discussions with Severus Snape about the nature of magic, Dumbledore's wise counsel in the most difficult moments of the war. When she passed by the high window that offered the best view of the Black Lake, Minerva stopped for a long moment. The dark water perfectly reflected the full moon shining that night, creating a liquid mirror that seemed to connect sky and earth in an impossible embrace. She thought of Dougal MacGregor, that simple young farmer who had represented her first true love. She thought of Elphinstone Urquhart, that gentle husband that life had briefly given her before snatching him away again. She thought of all those she had loved throughout her long and complex life. A soft smile, almost imperceptible, crossed her lips when the moon illuminated her face. It was a smile of complete acceptance, of peace finally conquered after decades of internal battle. There was no more regret in that smile, no more sharp pain or unanswered questions. Just the serene understanding of someone who had finally understood the complete meaning of her journey. Some whispered testimonies tell that on that specific night she climbed to the top of the Transfiguration Tower for the last time. She opened the wide window and let the icy wind enter freely, filling the room with pure air from the mountains. The entire castle seemed to breathe in synchrony with her, as if Hogwarts and Minerva had become a single entity over all those decades of deep connection. Some solemnly swear they saw a golden and ethereal light travel through the corridors that memorable night, as if the very magical heart of Hogwarts pulsed one last time in silent homage to the woman who had dedicated her entire life to protecting it. No one knows for certain what really happened after that moment. The accounts diverge, the stories contradict each other, and perhaps it's better that way. Some mysteries deserve to remain mysteries. Only that, when the following morning arrived, bringing the first golden rays of the rising sun, the majestic headmistress's chair was empty and silent. Light entered through the high windows with an uncommon sweetness, almost reverent, illuminating the office as if paying its final respects. The portraits of previous headmasters remained in respectful silence, and even Dumbledore, always so talkative in his painted form, simply observed with tears shining in his eyes of paint. Minerva McGonagall lived and departed exactly as she had lived each day of her existence, in profound silence, with absolute dignity and unshakable courage, until her last breath. Her complete story is living proof that love doesn't need to be lived in the traditional romantic sense to be genuinely true and transformative. The love that Minerva offered the world throughout her life was unique and special. It wasn't the love of fairy tales with conventional happy endings, but something infinitely more powerful and lasting. It was love manifested through tireless dedication to students, fierce protection of the school that was her home, unwavering loyalty to the principles she considered sacred. It was the kind of love that transforms not through grand romantic gestures, but through 1,000 small, consistent daily actions. The kind of love that completely transcends physical time, inevitable pain, and devastating losses. The love that remains solid and constant even when absolutely everyone else disappears. And so, still today, in the eternal corridors of Hogwarts, the echo of Minerva McGonagall's firm steps continues to resonate. The ancient walls whisper her name with reverence in moments of absolute silence, and the candles of the great hall seem to bow in respect when the magical wind blows through the open windows. No one who knew her story speaks of her as they speak of a common heroine from history books. They speak of her as something infinitely greater and more significant, an eternal presence that never truly departed. Because, you see, in each transfiguration spell cast with courage by a determined student, in each difficult choice made by a young wizard who decides to do what is right instead of what is easy, in each moment when someone sacrifices their own desires for the greater good, Minerva McGonagall continues absolutely alive. Not as a teacher, not as headmistress, not as any title or position she held during her physical life. She lives as the silent and eternal soul that kept Hogwarts standing through all storms, as the perfect example that true courage isn't in never feeling fear or pain, but in continuing to move forward even when the heart is broken. As living proof that some loves, the deepest and truest, aren't destined to be lived, but to be transformed into something greater that transcends any simple definition. And when you pass through the corridors of Hogwarts, whether physically or through the pages of books or movie scenes, stop for a moment, close your eyes, and listen carefully. Perhaps you'll be able to hear the distant echo of those firm steps. Perhaps you'll feel the comforting presence of someone who chose courage over ease, duty over desire, eternal love over temporary happiness. This is the true story of Minerva McGonagall. Not the simplified version from the movies that shows only her superficial severity, not the few lines from the books that barely scratch the surface of her complexity, but the complete and painful story of a woman who loved deeply, lost devastatingly, and still found strength to continue loving in ways that completely changed the world around her. A woman who proves every day through her eternal legacy that the greatest spell of all isn't one that transforms objects or conjures fire, but one that transforms hearts and inspires entire generations to be better than they ever imagined possible. So, what did you think of this story? Can you see Professor McGonagall with different eyes now? Comment below what impacted you most in this journey through her life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos exploring the deepest secrets of the Harry Potter universe. Until next time.